Pacers took Michael Jordan and the Bulls all the way to 7 games in the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals. Steve Kerr said that Game 7 was, quote, the scariest game we ever faced. And then he shared this story that he and teammate Judd Bushler were so nervous driving to that game that they didn't talk for the first 15 minutes of the ride. So, Shannon, how big of a threat were Reggie Miller and those Pacers to Jordan's Bulls?
Skip, I don't really think they were a serious threat, Skip. I think the thing is that the pressure started getting to the Bulls and realizing the enormity of what they were going for to finish, to try to get to their second of their three-peats. They needed to get past the Game 7. And they had, I think this, Skip, wasn't this only the second Game 7 they had ever had to endure in that run? And so, Skip, when I look at it, the difference between the Pacers and the Bulls had a bomb that can detonate at any time and go get you 40, 50. And the Pacers relied on balanced scoring. In order to beat the Bulls in that run, Skip, you had to have a guy that could detonate. And they didn't have that. Reggie only scored 20 points in that series twice. He averaged about 17. Rick Smith was about 16 a game. Skip, they prided themselves on toughness. They had a big team. Rick Smith, the Davis boys. And so that's what they tried to do, Skip. They tried to out-tough you because they tried to take a page out of what the Knicks had done, Skip, when they had Patrick and they had Oak, they had Charles Smith, Xavier McDaniel, Mason. So that's what the Pacers tried to do. Skip, you remember, Larry Bird was the head coach. And that was a style. They were a physical team. People don't realize not only were the Celtics talented and big, but they were physical. That's why the Pistons really didn't have they didn't have a problem with the Pistons early on, Skip. And then they started breaking down. They started getting old. Going to finals and going to Eastern Conference championships every year starts to take its toll. But, Skip, maybe because I was on the outside looking in, but I didn't really, there was no doubt in my mind that the Bulls were going to win this Game 7. And because I really never felt, Skip, that they were going to win this game in Chicago. Maybe not, if it had been in Indy, Skip, okay, you could have convinced me Indy had a realistic chance. And I thought early on they had an opportunity to steal some games in Chicago, and they let them slip. And so that was their opportunity. They had to get one of those games, Skip, and then close it out on their home floor. Because if they were ever going, they were not going to beat, Michael Jordan was not going to let that happen, was not going to let Reggie Miller and those Pacers beat them in a Game 7 in Chicago. So, Skip, for me, I never sensed that they were going to lose this Game 7 to the Pacers because I didn't think Pacers had enough scoring, and they could only get scoring from one place, and that was Reggie.
For once, we're going to agree on something, but for different reasons. So as I've told you, I was there in Chicago as the columnist for the Tribune, and I covered all 7 of those games, home and away. And let me tell you, they were knockdown dragouts. You're right. Those Pacers were the bad boy Pistons all over again in the later 90s instead of the late 80s. And that Pacers team, Reggie Miller said, was better than the Bulls. I'll give Reggie that. Top to bottom, the Pacers were better.
Yeah.
They were deep. They were tough. They were physical. They were sly and smart. And they were beautifully coached by Larry Bird in his first year as an NBA coach, named Coach of the Year. But to your point, Shannon, Larry couldn't play. If he could have played, I believe the Pacers would have won the series. But Larry could only sit and watch and try to maneuver his chess pieces against Jordan. And even though the Game 7 score was way down low, it was 88-83, it was more football than basketball. But in the end, what did we see Ahmad Rashad say back in the Bulls' offices sitting with Jordan before Game 7? Do you remember this? Ahmad Rashad was Jordan's best friend, hung with him before and after every game. Played pro football, as you know, was a very good receiver in pro football as Bobby Moore at that point. At
University of Oregon.
But Ahmad, at Oregon, Ahmad said to Jordan, as Jordan was trying to focus for the game, some can and some can't. And then he repeated it. Some can and some can't. Jordan said some can and some can't. He was talking about Reggie because in the end, in a Game 7, Reggie was going to have to rise up above Michael. And even though Reggie said, I was the only one, I wasn't afraid of him, I don't believe it, Reggie. Reggie told the story of when Reggie was a rookie that he dared to trash talk and had a good first half against Jordan, who then shut him up in the second half. And then as they walked off the floor, he said, you don't trash talk Black Jesus. Remember that? It's a great line. You don't trash talk Black Jesus, said Michael to Reggie. I believe in Reggie's heart that he believed from that point on, I'm up against Black Jesus here, and I don't really believe I can beat Black Jesus. So, Shannon, what happened in the fourth quarter of Game 7, again, to your point, at the United Center in Chicago? Jordan and Reggie were both sent back in at the same time by their respective coaches with 7:39 to play. It was a nip-tuck seesaw game, but from that mark on, Jordan guarded Reggie. And guess what? Reggie managed to get off one more shot, a three-point shot that missed badly. That was it for him for the last 7:39 of the game. Reggie down the stretch scored 0 points because Michael just said, no, you're not going to do it in my house. And in the end, the Pacers weren't going to win unless Reggie went off the way we saw him go off against Spike Lee's Knicks that time when he went ballistic crazy at the end of that playoff. Remember that? And he's capable. He was capable. He made a big shot on Michael at the end of Game 4. Remember? He pushed off. It was like 5 times more egregious than Michael pushing off Brian Russell at the end of Game 6, making the last shot. But in this case, Reggie got away with a big shove-off and made the late 3 that won Game 4. So he was capable of doing it in Game 4, but when it comes to Game 7, some can and some can't. In the end, Reggie could not. So that was the difference in that series. That was it was extremely competitive, and a lot of the national media were there because they thought it was going to be the end of Michael Jordan. A lot of people believe that Game 7 would have been his last game, and you know the rest of the story.
Skip, do you ever think there'll be that a network will allow someone to get like Ahmad and Mike? Do you think a network would allow one of its on-air personalities to have that type of relationship with another player again?
Yeah, sure, if it gets them a post-game interview every time. Well, listen, Michael would stop for Ahmad like before and after every game. Ahmad had the goods, man. He had everything. He did. He knew everything. Now, there are some things, again, there's sacrifice that you have to make because some things he's going to protect. But Ahmad was I know Ahmad. He's a really good reporter. He would report up to the edge of the cliff everything that he could about Jordan. So I think it benefited NBC at the time with that contract to have Ahmad on their side.
Skip, I don't know. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Skip, I didn't write this down last night. They were on the sideline, and Phil said, we're going to switch. And Michael said, I'm not switching. You know what? I'm chasing everything. No. Somebody's like, we're going to switch. And Mike looked back over his shoulder like, shut up. We're not switching. He's like, I'm going everything. I'm fighting over every screen. I'm fighting through everything.
We're not switching through every pick. I'm not switching nothing. No. Right.
Exactly.
And I believe it was about Reggie. It was like, I'm going to take his you-know-what, and I'm going to take it out of the game. Because remember how they would run Reggie off the back line, and they'd run him through 8 picks? And Jordan says, no, I'm fighting through every one, and I'm going to wind up in his face when he shoots his jumper. And he did. He wouldn't even let him get his jump shot off down the stretch of Game 4.
And that was the thing, Skip. You got to realize they had 7'4" Rick Smith, and then you got to run past one Davis, and you got to run past the other Davis. And Reggie was doing what Ray Allen and Steph Curry and Rip Hamilton did. Reggie was doing that in the 80s. Reggie was doing that way before those guys even thought about picking up a basketball and getting on an NBA court. So he was continuous motion, and what they were trying to do, Skip, was trying to tire him out, taking those body blows. Okay, you take a forearm to the chest here, you take a hip to the hip there, and we're trying to tire him out. But for Jordan to sustain that kind of level of energy, Skip, You would not ask your best player to guard the opposing team's best player pick after pick after pick because, like you said, they're going to switch it. Okay, and switch that. Mike says, I ain't switching jack. I'm fighting over everything.
Nothing. And allow me to conclude this discussion by making one last point. There was a crucial jump ball in that game with the Pacers up, I believe, 3, wanting to go up 5 with 6:39 left in the fourth quarter. And it's Jordan against Rick Smits, who was 7 feet 4 inches tall versus Jordan 6'6". 6'6" versus 7'4", and Jordan won the tip. Now, I think he went up and sort of hammered into his arm a little bit and got away with one. Yeah. But that was Michael, and that was another play that doesn't show up in the box score. So Channing Frye, he did have other jobs besides scoring. Thank you.
And, Skip, it went right to Steve Kerr, who already had his feet set, and he launched a 3, and boom. It went from possibly being a 5-point game to a tie ball game, and the Bulls never looked back, and it was over. That ended it right there.
All right, listen up, guys. Were we closer to seeing Jordan win a 7th ring than we thought?